I can't wait to see the content that people create. It is such a smart way. And I think people in your audience probably are not using it as much as in other fields. So I think it's a fantastic way to stand out and be different.
I'm Ken Newhouse. To me, building a profitable business isn't only about generating leads and driving sales. It's about who we are and what we're made of. I succeed in business by finding the most effective methods to persuade, inspire, and ignite the imagination of others, and find the most effective methods to persuade, inspire, and ignite the imagination of others to succeed in business. I am the new breed of entrepreneur. Join us on the quest as we search for the newest and most effective methods you can use to get clients now. Are you still trying to figure out how to create a content marketing strategy that consistently attracts qualified prospects? Are you still trying to figure out how to create content that your perfect prospects crave and want to ravenously consume? Are you still trying to figure out a content strategy you can use to increase opt-ins by as much as 240 to 310%? Suppose I told you that in just 24 hours, a new law was going to be enacted online, and that whatever content marketing strategy that you had in place was what you had to use for the next 3 years. You had to keep your existing content marketing strategy for the next 3 years, which means if you were publishing content daily or weekly, you'd be allowed to keep publishing daily or weekly. But if you didn't have a winning content marketing strategy in place, what would that do to your business tomorrow? And better, what effect would that have on your business 3 years from now? You know, I was at a seminar a few years back, and the featured speaker started his presentation by asking what I thought was a totally off-the-wall question. He said, "What color is a stop sign?" The audience shouted, "Red, of course." And then he asked, "What color is a yield sign?" And to my great surprise, 3/4 of the room said yellow, which would be wrong. Yield signs are red with a white center. The point in sharing that story with you is simple. Not everything is as you remember. That's known as the Mandela effect. So perhaps it's time to consider those limiting beliefs you have about content marketing. I'm your host, Ken Newhouse, and if you answered yes to any of those questions I opened the show with, or if you had 24 hours to update and improve your content marketing strategy and wanted to access what many experts are calling the most effective content marketing strategy ever discovered, I want you to know you're in for an amazing show today, because in less than 45 minutes, you're going to learn a system that can make you a master content creator and strategist by this time next week. My guest today is Pamela Wilson, the former content manager for copyblogger.com, a position she held for over half a decade for the world's leading content marketing website. Everybody knows that Wilson is also one of the web's leading content marketing strategists and coaches, but what you may not know is that she's the author of 2 of the most downloaded books on content marketing ever sold on Amazon. Master Content Marketing, which we covered in episode number 369, and Master Content Strategy, which is our topic for today's show. Getting Wilson booked for a second appearance on today's show was easy, but getting her to reveal 5 of the best content marketing strategies she's ever used wasn't. Number 4 has been working like gangbusters, not only for this podcast, but for our blog, and even better, the new book that I'm working on currently. Now we're going to cover strategy number 4 in intimate detail today, and in just a bit, Wilson is going to pull back the curtain and show you how to put it to work for you and your business. So if you're ready to get started, let's welcome Pamela Wilson back on the show. So on behalf of myself and the members of the Get Clients Now Nation, Pamela, I want to welcome you to the show today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Ken. I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It's something I love to talk about.
Yeah, if you actually happen to miss the first interview we did with Pamela, that was on her book, her first bestseller, Master Content Marketing, and that was back in episode 369 of the Get Clients Now podcast. And if you hadn't had the opportunity yet to listen to that show, I want to highly encourage you to do that, because literally, Pamela, you knocked it out of the park. I hope you do that again today. I hope you absolutely overwhelm our fans and members of the Get Clients Now Nation with some more actionable information that we can put into use, like as soon as we're done listening to the podcast. It was that good. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and dive in and get started.
I'm aiming for out of the park completely, yeah.
You know, Pamela, I think it's fair to say that the majority of our clients and members, and I'm sure a good number of the members of the Get Clients Now Nation, know who you are because they're all very heavily invested in content marketing for their businesses. But if you could, let's just assume for a second we got some folks listening today who aren't really familiar with all that you've accomplished up to this point. So if you could take a minute or two, give us your backstory, fill us in on who you are, and give us the information we're going to need to get the most out of today's interview.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to be talking about Master Content Strategy, which is the second book in that Master Content series, which I did not know I was going to write. I didn't have any plans to write it. But the reason I wrote it is that I had this experience that seemed really relevant to content strategy, and I knew I needed to share what I had learned from the experience. And the experience was basically I had my own blog. It had maybe 4 years of content. And then I was hired to manage the Copy Blogger blog, which had 10 years of content. And what I saw was that the content strategy for a newer blog or a blog like mine at the time that was in its growing years was very different from the content strategy you needed to use if you had a blog that had like a bank of content, like an archive. So I didn't see anyone talking about that. I thought it was really important to communicate that information. And I learned so much from managing blogs in these 3 stages. My own blog when it was just a newborn baby, and then in its growing years, and then taking over Copy Blogger, which had 10 years and hundreds of really amazing, strong pieces of content marketing. It was a real learning experience, and I wanted to communicate what I had figured out in a book.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, Pamela, that myself included and so many other people are incredibly thankful that you actually took the time to share that experience. But let's do this. As you remember from our previous interview, one of the things that I love to do is I love to ask a few personal questions about our guests. Again, it helps fans, it helps the listeners of the show to get a better feel for the individual being interviewed. And so I want to ask you a question very similar to the one I asked you back in our first interview in episode 369. And that is, what's something about you that people in the marketplace don't really know about you, but you'd like them to know?
I don't know if you asked me this before, and I'm not sure how I answered. The one thing that people may not realize is that I did not come into this process of using content marketing as someone who considered herself to be a writer. I knew a little bit about marketing, but I knew about it from the visual aspect. I have a design background, but I did not feel like a strong writer at all. So that might be interesting for people to know, because if they feel like, oh, I can't use content marketing, I'd have to learn to write. Or if they're basing their judgment on how well they can write based on like the grades they got in middle school English class, then they really should keep their minds open to the fact that this is a skill that anyone can learn, even someone who doesn't think they're really a writer.
You know, Pamela, you bring up a really good point, I think a very valid point, in that you don't have to be a college English major in order to write really good content that drives action from your perfect prospects, clients, customers, and patients. And in fact, some of my friends actually recommended that I don't ever share this. But the fact is that I graduated near the bottom of my high school class, and writing was a skill set that I never possessed. Now, what's funny about that is that I'm now an accomplished direct response copywriter, and I have been for almost 20 years. But with respect to creating copy, you know, you've got Master Content Marketing, you got the book we're talking about today, Master Content Strategy. You've also created around those 2 successful books, those 2 bestsellers, Big Brand System. And I think working at Copy Blogger and managing their blog for all those years really helped. So without question, you're one of the leading authorities in the field of content marketing. But what I'd like to know, and I think some of our listeners would probably like to know, is prior to creating Big Brand System and prior to writing these 2 best-selling books, were you always successful in your business endeavors?
No. You know, life is full of ups and downs. I think it's more about, I mean, it's such a cliche, but it's more about, you know, when things don't work out, how do you respond to that situation? Do you just say, oh, well, I'm not cut out for this, I'm not made for this, and you throw in the towel and you give up? Or do you say, okay, well, that didn't work, but what's going to work? And that's always been my approach. I mean, I've had things that didn't work out the way I expected.
If you're wondering why you want to deploy a proven content marketing strategy for your business, imagine this scenario. Imagine for a moment that you and your business were considered the king or queen of content marketing in your industry or niche. Imagine what that could do for your business and, more importantly, your bank account. Content marketing helps to improve conversions because it allows you to connect with and educate your prospects, leads, and customers. Not only are you working to build trust and relationships, but you also encourage conversions by giving consumers the information they need to make an educated purchasing decision. 10 years ago, few, if any, of your competitors were producing quality content online. Today, however, that's all changed. In virtually every industry, the most successful businesses are consistently producing quality content. And if you're not, you're missing an enormous opportunity. 21 years ago, I got my first client from the internet, and I was so excited. I had a super successful business, but my success got the better of me, and I made the mistake of not consistently producing content online. It wasn't long before my competitors were catching me. These were people who weren't delivering the same level of value to the marketplace as we were, but the fact that they consistently put up content week in and week out almost cost me the dominant position in the marketplace. Thankfully, I realized my mistake, adopted a content marketing plan, and every week I posted a new high-quality piece of content. That strategy eventually started paying huge dividends for me, and if you'll decide to create and deploy a content marketing strategy for your business, it can pay off for you as well.
The thing is, Ken, I try to look at everything like a big experiment as much as possible. It's like you're just kind of in the business world, especially doing a series of experiments. And the ones that work out are the ones that you double down on. And the ones that don't, you can't beat yourself up over them. They're just an experiment. You got the data, and the data said not to keep doing that thing. So you just stop doing it and you do something else.
All right, Pamela, so based on that answer, let me ask you this question. I've got a question that's not scripted, but something just came to mind. When's the first time that you really realized, and when I say really realized, like you actually got it, you really recognized, hey, listen, I got to get this content marketing thing nailed down. I got to get this right. If I'm going to be successful online, if I'm going to have a successful business that does any type of business online, I got to get this right.
Honestly, I think the first moment is when I first started guest posting. I got to the point that I felt strong enough as a content creator, and this was really only a few months into the process, that I started reaching out to these larger sites and seeing if I could post on their sites. And when I would get all of these signups to my email list. And I started to realize, wow, if I write something that people find useful, they respond. I mean, they want to be connected with me. It was just amazing to me. So that was when I realized, okay, I need to find a way to do this very consistently and just very deliberately. And that's how it all kind of started to develop into a strategy. It didn't develop immediately. It was something that I figured out over time.
All right, Pamela, now that we've covered some of your backstory, some of the personal things about you, I want to start to dive into the book and then start to dive into some of the teachings, some of the information, the strategies that you cover in Master Content Strategy. But before we actually go full bore into the book and before we actually dive into the strategies, I got one question in particular about the book Master Content Strategy. Actually, it's a two-part question. Which part of writing this book did you enjoy the most? And then the flip side of that is, which part of writing the book did you enjoy least?
I think the part that I enjoyed most is when, and I'm sure you're going to ask me about this, but that website life cycle concept where you kind of approach your website as having different needs depending on how many years it's been live and how much content you have on it.
Back then, I didn't have someone like Pamela Wilson there to guide me. In fact, I made several mistakes. As an example, when we started producing content consistently, I wasn't optimizing my content for conversions. Optimize for conversions? How do you do that? Simple. Just be sure to include a clear call to action. Your call to action tells your prospect what to do next, guiding them to the next step in the conversion process. Whether converting means downloading a lead magnet, making a purchase, getting more information, or simply contacting your sales team, it's important to make it clear to the prospect within the content what you want them to do next.
I really enjoyed that because when I would tell people about this idea, you could just see their shoulders drop and they just looked so much more relaxed once they realized oh, my baby site that's only 2 months old, I don't need to be doing the things that I see someone who's been doing this for 10 years doing with their website. I need to focus on something else. So it took a lot of things off their plate, actually, which felt like I think a relief. So that felt so good to be kind of laying all that out in a way that people could understand. And like you said, kind of have a system, a path to follow.
Listen up, because I asked you which part of the book did you enjoy writing the most, you got to answer the second part of that question. By the way, this is a fabulous, fabulous book, a book that you should invest in. But Pamela, which part of writing this book, Master Content Strategy, did you enjoy writing the least?
I know. It's so funny because I really enjoy writing books. I mean, I've been looking for a way to carve out time in my schedule because I've got another one that's kind of knocking in my brain telling me to write it. So no one's asked me that. And it's super hard to think of what it would be. The only thing I can think of is maybe, there's like front matter and back matter that you have to put together. In these master content books, I typically go out and have interviewed content creators who have done really well online with their content. And I ask them a series of questions and then I gather that all together. And it's not that I don't like that, but it's probably the least creative part. The end result is awesome though, because it's almost like hearing from all of these voices of people whose content you've seen online over the years, answering the kinds of questions you're probably asking yourself. So I don't love it as much, but I love the final results. So I guess maybe the appendix information and the front matter and all that, I get excited about actually writing the book content. That's the most fun.
Pamela, one of the questions that I've been really dying to ask you is this, and it's based on the content, the strategies that you teach in the book. But, if we take a close look at the people who listen to the Get Clients Now podcast, if we take a look at the members of the Get Clients Now Nation, we've got coaches, consultants, we've got healthcare practitioners like dentists, we've got chiropractors, just some really, really smart individuals who listen to this podcast. But herein lies the question, and in fact, herein lies the problem. We've got all these really super smart individuals, many of them very, very successful in business. But when it comes to content marketing, the approach they're using, the strategies that they're using with their content are failing. And when I say failing, what I'm saying is their content isn't producing the new patient traffic, the new client traffic, the new customer traffic, the opt-ins that lead to phone calls, that lead to appointments, whatever the case may be, whether you're all online or whether you're a brick and mortar business offline, the content isn't leading to the desired response these business owners want the prospects to take, which is ultimately, hey, buy my stuff. Why do you think that so many smart people are producing content that is simply not doing the job that it's intended to do?
I would direct them actually to go back to Master Content Marketing. The Master Content Strategy book does a quick review of best practices when you're creating content. Master Content Marketing really is a deep dive into that. Honestly, if you want a quick win, you work on your headline and you work on your first sentence, and then you make sure that there's a call to action somewhere toward the end of the content. If it's a longer piece of content or a podcast or a video, you insert that call to action somewhere in the middle as well. If you can hit those 3 points and get them right, that can make a world of difference. And then sometimes, like you said, just like you plan out the structure of a book, you plan out the structure of a piece of content in advance. And one mind shift that you can do when you're working on your book, Ken, and anyone can do when you're working on a piece of content, is to not think of it so much like an outline. I never like to think about it as an outline because I think we all have like PTSD from English class when the teacher said, write an outline and then you're going to create an essay, and it's just not fun. So instead of an outline, what I recommend is you think about it like the backbone that you're going to be hanging everything off of. In your case, you might want to think about it like almost like an itinerary. Like I'm planning this itinerary for this trip I'm going to take as I write this book. And you want to make sure that you're hitting the highlights, that the trip is interesting from start to finish, that you get off to a strong start, that the middle is interesting, and it has a fantastic wrap up at the end. Going back to that overarching structure and then making sure that the headline, the first sentence, and the call to action are all rock solid, that can make a huge difference.
yeah, those same principles apply when you're writing powerful direct response copy, whether it's a sales letter, whether it's script for a webinar, whatever it is, video sales letter, it doesn't matter. You have to start off with a compelling headline to suck people in. And the job of the headline is very simply to get people to stop and read the content, stop and read the ad, stop and read the sales letter, stop and watch the video sales letter. Whatever the case is, the job of the headline is to get the ideal prospect to stop what they're doing and pay attention to what it is that you have for them in the form of content. The job of the first sentence. What's the job of the first sentence? It's to get people to actually go to the second sentence. Whether they're reading or if they're watching or listening, the job of the first sentence, if they're watching a video sales letter, is to get them to watch long enough so they can hear and see what happens in the second sentence, and so on and so forth. So the tenets of good content marketing are very, very similar to the tenets that make up powerful direct response copy. Now, I want to dive into the book a little bit deeper and I want to talk about one of the strategies that really appealed to me, and that's called the life cycle approach. Now, I'm not referring to people who've gone through your training, people who are your clients or your customers, people who know and understand and are intimately aware with how to deploy the life cycle approach. But as it relates to business owners, again, they could be the smartest people in business, but when it comes to content marketing, they need some help. So as it relates to the life cycle approach, what are you seeing with everyone who, as I mentioned, is not a client of yours, not a student of yours, that business owners are making as it relates to the life cycle approach?
You know, I think there's a lot of comparison online, which on the one hand, it's awesome. You and I come from a time when if you wanted to do any kind of competitive research, you had to call and get a brochure from a business sent in the mail. I mean, it's you might as well talk about carving something in stone with a chisel. I mean, it was so old fashioned.
If you've ever tried to solve one of those mind bender puzzles, the metal rings that are stuck together, you have to figure out how to pull them apart. It can take you a while to figure it out. And if you're like me, it might even frustrate you. But if I handed you a little manual that showed you the secret for how it works, you'd be able to solve that puzzle quickly and easily. That's what Pamela Wilson does in her book, Master Content Strategy. One of the main reasons that Wilson's book has generated record sales is that it literally holds you by the hand and walks you step by step through the process of building a proven content marketing strategy for your business. She starts the book in section 1 by introducing you to the life cycle approach to content strategy. In a nutshell, this section teaches you how to craft compelling, important content your perfect prospects are going to ravenously consume. In section 2, Wilson reveals how to incorporate multimedia into your content so you'll become magnetic and irresistible to your prospects and customers. And in section 3, she shows you how to supercharge your content by teaching you not only how to repurpose your content, but more importantly, the 3-step formula for amplifying your content for maximum effectiveness.
And nowadays, it's so easy to just type into a browser and see what your competition is doing. So that's fantastic, but it can also be super intimidating because if you are starting out in a market with a brand new website and you're looking at this blank website, completely blank, thinking, I have to fill this with content that's going to attract an audience, and you see someone who's been doing it for a while, it can just make you freeze in place. And you don't even know how to take the first step because you don't even know what direction you should be going in. So that's why I wanted to come in with a kind of a plan. It's like there are specific things that you should be focusing on in year 1. And then as you move into the second year and in that growth phase, you need to focus on some different things. And then as you get a huge archive of content, then the focus changes once again. So I really wanted people to understand that so that they didn't feel frozen in place, so that they felt like, okay, I got a lot of work to do, but at least I know what I need to do.
Yeah, so Pamela, let me get your thoughts on this. This was another question that I didn't have written down, but something I've noticed, and in my estimation, it's a huge mistake that people make. And in fact, I think when I first started my podcast 3 years ago, actually it's been over 3 years ago, I tried to sound too important. I tried to sound more sophisticated. I tried to sound more accomplished as a podcaster than I actually was. And I see a lot of people doing this in their content, whether it's a podcast, it's a blog post, whether it's a video sales letter or a webinar. It seems to me that a lot of professionals, a lot of business owners are trying to sound much more professional or even accomplished. Not that they're lying, but much more accomplished than they actually are. And my question really deals with personality, and how much of that we should be putting into our content. So as an example, taking that a little bit further, I have a good sense of humor. I like to joke around. Sometimes I think I'm probably not as serious as I should be, but that doesn't really come through all that much in my podcast. And the reason is because early on I found that some of my guests who really don't know me, like my friends know me, or my family knows me, or my clients and members know me, they don't understand my sense of humor. It's not sick or demented or anything ungodly like that, but I like to joke around. I like to have fun. And so I'm curious to know how much of our unique personality should come through in our content. And in addition to that, what are your thoughts on people trying to sound too professional or too accomplished? And in some cases, they're trying to sound like they're a big corporation, like they're this huge, successful, multi-billion-dollar company. What are your thoughts on that?
It's funny because I feel like humor is almost a different topic because humor can really be impacted by someone's cultural background and their family background. So that's a tricky one. And you probably are safer erring on the side of universal topics that aren't offensive. But that might be the only place. I mean, outside of that, I feel like we are leaving such a huge advantage on the table if we do not show who we are in the content that we create. Because corporations have to a certain extent, be a little bit monolithic and appealing to everyone, right? But as small business owners, we do not need that. And the corporations would love to be able to use the voices that we have, to use a voice that's very personal, to use a voice that sounds like a real person that's relatable. And so I think that we're leaving an advantage on the table if we don't inject our content with our voices. Now, what does that look like? Because lots of people ask me. I think it's really smart if rather than, sitting down to create a piece of content and saying, what am I going to talk about? Like, this story just happened, but like, is that appropriate to share? I don't know if that really works, or if it's not part of my persona, my public persona, is it going to be confusing if I share that? I find it really helpful to develop themes about who you are as a business, as a person who represents a business, and to revisit those themes over and over again in all your content. And that can really help you. It serves almost as a filter. So you think about some random story that happened and you think, does it fit in with these themes that recur through all my content? And if it doesn't, you don't use it. But if you can make it fit into these themes, then you use it. So I have certain themes, and they're themes that share something about me, but they're not so personal that I feel like it's TMI. My husband's an engineer, so I don't name him, but I call him the engineer in my content. And that way I can talk about conversations we've had, without like sharing his name and having weird people show up on my doorstep and stuff. I live in Nashville, so I talk about the fact that I live in Nashville once in a while. I talk about the city. It's an interesting place to live. I am obsessed with documentaries. So I talk about that sometimes. I talk about the fact, I was watching this documentary about blah, blah, blah. And I find it really fascinating how history repeats itself. So I talk about that a lot. I lived in Latin America and I speak Spanish fluently. And I do not look like someone who speaks Spanish fluently. That's something that most people, by looking at me, would never know. So I refer to that occasionally so that people just know that about me too. It's kind of like a weird fact that you wouldn't know. I've lived outside the country and I've looked at the US from the outside, which is always fascinating. And because I lived in Latin America, I love all tropical fruit. Like, the weirder, the better. The more bizarre looking, the more I love to try it. I mean, they're kind of innocuous, right? But they give you a feeling of maybe who I am as a person. So I can just return to those themes over and over again. I think in particular, it's really helpful when you're doing content in the context of like email marketing. You can inject it with a lot of personality, which maybe you wouldn't put on your website quite as much. It's almost like levels of intimacy. So what you put out there on your website goes out to whoever hits your pages. What you send out to your email list is a group that has asked to be connected to you. So maybe you get just a tinge more personal with that group. And that's where bringing in those themes can be really helpful. It can just help to guide you as you're putting together your content.
I'm going to follow that up with this question that I didn't have scripted. It seems like I've had a lot of those today. But Pamela, in the book, you talked about multitasking with content. I'd like you to take a minute or two and talk about that and why it's so important for us to actually utilize this strategy, this framework in our content marketing program.
I think, and we'll go over this when we go over the life cycle, but year one, really your primary goal is to set what I call as a content foundation on your website. You need to let the search engines know what your website is about. So you need to just create content, hopefully weekly content, a piece a week. It doesn't matter if it's written, it can be audio, it could be video, but you need to try to aim for a piece a week. And there are a couple of things that will do. As I said, you've got a content foundation. So you're telling the search engines, hey, this is what this website's about. This is what I'm going to talk about here on this website. So you're telling them that. But you're also growing as a content creator. I mean, this goal is as much about you as it is about the search engines. It's about growing your content marketing chops to a certain extent, because if you create weekly content for a year, you're going to be a really good content marketer after a year. It's that weekly practice, right?
You know, everybody knows that Neil Patel is one of the world's leading content marketing thought leaders. And he was recently quoted as saying, paid advertising has long been a reliable tactic for customer acquisition. As retargeting has exploded, ads have even helped growing businesses retain customers, improve customer lifetime value, and reduce customer churn and cart abandonment. Unfortunately, paid advertising is becoming less effective. Nearly 200 million people were using ad blockers in 2015. Today, in 2020, more than 615 million devices now have ad blockers on them. Approximately 11% of the global internet population is blocking ads online. And it's not just on desktop. There are even ad blocker apps for the mobile experience. That might make for a better online experience for customers, but it spells trouble for brands who rely primarily on paid ads to reach current and new customers. So how do you get around the ad block movement? Content marketing is the answer. And for those businesses who aren't consistently producing content, chances are good that you won't be in business 5 years from now.
So what happens is people go in year one, like I said, they've got comparisonitis. So they're looking at all these people who've had sites for 7 or 8 years. And those people have YouTube channels and they have a podcast and they're repurposing their podcast on Facebook and like doing all this sophisticated stuff. And they're thinking, wow, I have to be like them. No, you don't. You really just have to grow your content marketing muscles. You got to publish content on your website, get better at it. And then in year two, you can focus on maybe expanding into multimedia content and doing more of that. But it's a little bit like boot camp, right? You got to put in that learning time so that you can get a really firm foundation as a content marketer, especially, I mean, even if you are a writer. Regardless, I think it's important to have that foundation.
All right, Pamela, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into the game show mode here, and I'm going to actually pull a quote from your book, and I'm going to follow up that quote by asking you just a few bulleted questions. Actually, it's a 4-part question. And what I'd like you to do is follow up those bulleted questions with short, to the point, hard-hitting answers. Here's the quote. Having a I have no choice but to do this attitude will lead to you publishing dutiful, uninspired content that doesn't actually work. Here's my follow-up 4-part question to that quote. Why did you say that? What is the lazy way to create content? How do we implement it? And what results can we expect if we implement this framework in our content marketing?
I talk about the lazy way in the first book, and I review it quickly in this book, but the lazy way really is to break it up and do it over several days. So what I find that a lot of content creators really struggle with is just finding a big enough block of time to create content. So the lazy way is when you go and break down over several days and just do a little bit at a time each day. It makes it so much easier.
Yes, and just for your reference, as Pamela mentioned in our previous interview, which was episode number 369 of the Get Clients Now podcast, we went into great depth on the lazy way. So if you're wanting to know more about that particular framework, I want to suggest that you go back and listen to episode number 369, or in fact, you could actually invest in Pamela's book, Master Content Marketing. And having said that, Pamela, your company, Big Brand Systems, one of the leading content marketing, coaching, and consulting companies online today. And so I wanted to ask you, what are 2 or 3 steps that an individual or a company can take to build a really solid and successful content marketing program for their business?
You want to talk about the content marketing life cycle. I feel like we've been kind of alluding to it, and I think that might be the answer to this question. I'd love to go through it briefly. Yeah, so we already talked about what you want to aim for in year 1, which is to create a content foundation. You want to put the word out to search engines. Hey, this is what this site is about. This is what we talk about here. You also want to build your skills as a content creator. You want to make sure that after that first year, you've got solid content creation skills. Then we move into years 2 through 5. And in years 2 through 5, what you want to aim for is to create content that's a little more in depth. So maybe you research your content a little bit more. Maybe you reach out to people in your industry and gather quotes from them. Or maybe you do start to add multimedia. So you write a piece of content, you add a video to it, something like that. If you've managed to write more or less a piece of content a week in year 1, then starting in year 2, you can reduce the frequency to every other week, for example, and just write longer pieces of content because you have this great foundation. So you want to focus on, it's almost like, if you're in, let's say you're learning to become a swimmer and you work with a coach and you get your speed up and, you're doing a certain number of laps. And then in the second year, the coach challenges you to do more laps and do them faster, right? So it's the same kind of thing. It's like you're still doing the same thing. You're still creating content, but you're just creating it at a slightly higher level. And if you can practice that in years 2 through 5, then you'll have not only that great content foundation that you created in the first year, but then you have this additional content that is built by someone who knows how to create content because you built those skills, right? And you keep adding it to your site, right? So you do that. You do that in the first year and then years 2 through 5. Then at the end of the 5th year, you could have 300 pieces of content on your site, good pieces of content. Some of it will be stronger than others, and you can look at your analytics and see what's doing well. But at that point, you start to become someone who spends some time every month maintaining older content, which we've also kind of alluded to, making sure things are updated, making sure content that needs to be highlighted again is updated and maybe republished and brought to the forefront. And it's almost like, I say to people, it's like you're a reference librarian. So because you have a lot of content, people might hit your site and say, whoa, there's a lot here. I don't even know where to start. So then it's your job to build in some navigation things that help people to find what they need on your site so they don't get lost in all the content you've created. So your job really does change over the years. And I think when you understand that, it can be a lot easier to understand what you need to be focusing on at any given time.
Pamela, where do you see content marketing and the importance of content marketing for the success and profitability of businesses, whether they're purely online or they're a combination of offline and online, or maybe they're just 100% brick and mortar? Where do you see the importance and the relevance of content marketing 3 years from today?
It's really interesting. We talked a little bit about the fact that we're in this pandemic environment. And what I am seeing right now is people are struggling. Nobody really knows what the future is going to hold. The one thing that I know for sure right now, though, is there is one safe location to do business consistently, and it's online. Online business has been a great option for years. And now it's not the only option, but it's maybe one of the few options that's 100% safe that no shutdown will have an impact on.
Now I want to wrap this up with 4 questions. Do you have a content marketing strategy in place for your business? Number 2, can you see how consistently deploying high-quality content online can benefit your business? Number 3, which content marketing strategy that we cover today do you think can immediately impact your business? And number 4, in virtually every industry in the world, every leading company consistently produces content online. Are you ready to make the decision to create a content marketing strategy for your business?
So it's like you can count on this environment that we're in right now, as sick as people are of Zoom and all of this stuff. You can count on this being there. It was there before, it's here now, it's going to be here after. So I feel like increasing your skills in this area will not be wasted. Learning how to sew a mask, you may not need that a couple of years from now, but learning how to create great content, that's an investment that you can, it's a long game. It's like planting seeds, or planting a bulb that you put in one year and then it comes up every year and you enjoy it. It's something that you do thinking about the future. It's not necessarily something that will pay off right away, but it's an investment.
All right, so listen, I can't possibly cover everything in Pamela's book. It's just not possible to get that done, to cover everything in finite detail like it deserves to be covered. But having said that, Pamela, what's the one question today that I didn't ask, but I should have asked?
I think it's really about how to fit in promotions. So we've talked about content marketing being a long game and it's a long play and you put in the time and you see the payoff down the line. And that's great, but there is a way to use content marketing when you have an upcoming promotion. So the way to do it really is to think ahead about what you're going to be promoting. Maybe you have a sale coming up. Maybe you have a discount you're going to run. Maybe you're going to have a coupon that you do a direct mail piece and you send out to your community, something that you want to make sure appears on your website and you want to create some content around it. So what you want to do really is to create kind of a marketing calendar. It doesn't have to be super planned, but you just look ahead like, okay, 3 weeks down the road, I know I'm going to be sending out this coupon, and 2 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks in advance of that week that people will have the coupon in their hands, you start talking about why they need that thing that they're just about to get a coupon for. And what you're going to do is create desire and really prime them to be like, wow, I just had this feeling I needed this thing because I've been reading all this great content about it, and now I have a coupon for it. So it's great to use content that way as well, because that's probably the closest we can come to having this super quick win where we publish a piece of content and we immediately see the payoff.
All right, Pamela, let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and assume that the person listening right now didn't hear episode number 369 and they're not familiar with how to get in touch with you and how to find out more about your company big brand system and all the awesome results that you're getting. I know you got a lot of testimonials on your website. So how can people find out more about you, your company big brand system, and your books? What's the URL to your website?
It's contentprofitformula.com. People can go there and get a workshop from me. It's a free workshop. It's available on demand. So you sign up and you can start watching it right away. I highly recommend that because we talk about some of the same things that we've talked about here, but I definitely embellish. Got some great slides for you and it moves fast. So show up with something to take notes. That is one way. My website is bigbrandsystem.com. They can always go there and explore. And the books are mastercontentmarketing.com and mastercontentstrategy.com. And those will lead you to pages that will show you all the places you can buy the books.
Sweet. Anything else you want to add before we run?
I can't wait to see the content that people create. It is such a smart way. And I think people in your audience probably are not using it as much as in other fields. So I think it's a fantastic way to stand out and be different.
Our objective with this podcast is to help you and your business stand out in the marketplace by crystallizing your messaging, marketing, and communications. On behalf of the whole Ken Newhouse team, thanks for listening.